Childhood trauma into thriving adult. Hello everybody, it's Kirsten Hunter here. So Susannah, did you know this is called Signposts for Living with Dr. Kirsten Hunter? Not very creative, is it?
Well, I think it's a bit creative, Kirsten. I mean, I've never actually come across a book with that title, so...
Well, I'd hope not. I did check. So everybody, this is Susannah Birch, a dear friend of mine who's come along to share her background, her story, and it's a very inspiring story. And I think there's a lot of depth in there that we can learn from. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me, Kirsten. I'm excited.
Yeah, no, you've done quite a few of these podcasts, haven't you?
I have. I don't know. I seem to just keep getting messages online saying, hey, want to do a podcast? And they happen.
Come along. How many have you done, do you think?
Well, maybe 15.
And what were you saying? You wanted to do more podcasts than you've heard?
Well, I have done more podcasts than I've heard. I actually, honestly, don't listen to podcasts. I'm a reader. I don't like videos either.
That's not good advertising. That's funny. I like that.
Well, I have people contact me going, we love your podcast. And I'm like, well, I'm glad someone listens to them. Everyone seems to.
Yeah. Now, we have like a bit of an interesting background, don't we? You've taught me a bit about social media. This is very much your world, social media.
I love digital. It's just such an amazing place to spread important messages, and I work in marketing for that reason, because when you look at psychology, it's amazing how you can work one-on-one, but from my perspective, marketing is the same but about spreading messages to multiple people.
And when we met,
without the same depth.
I was a social media virgin.
Yes, and it took me years to convince you to really... I don't think you even had a Facebook account when we first met.
No, you had to explain to me the difference between everything. It was quite funny.
And then you went, I'm diving in the deep end, and I have, you had like 8 accounts and you set them up in one day.
Well, no, not quite a day, maybe a month. We've got the web page. Is that your website? Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube channel, and podcast.
Did you say LinkedIn?
No, we've got LinkedIn too. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a really good point. Oh, it's so funny. I'm such a dag. I love it.
Oh, well, look, you're great in your area. I'm great in mine.
Absolutely. And let's, it'd be good to kind of explain. We're going to get into childhood trauma here, but let's talk about you as an adult. So we won't get into the personal stuff too much, but you've got 2 gorgeous kids. You work in marketing. You've had a bit of an array in different areas. You've even got involved as a birth doula.
Yep,
Yes.
That's right.
And ever since I've known you, you're always studying something different. And you've got, I don't know how many degrees you've been playing with, but you just seem to have an insatiable appetite for learning. I would describe you as Tigger with regard to learning.
I've never even watched Winnie and the Pooh.
Well, don't. Actually, there's lots of psychological, personalities coming through there. It's quite interesting.
Well, honestly, I think that links back to my childhood. I was never allowed to watch any of those things. So I never did.
On cue. Let's go with that. Okay, so we're talking about childhood trauma. Now, obviously you and I, we know each other pretty well, so I know your background, but I'm going to try to canvass it a little bit. So we're talking about mental health issues from your mum. Yep. So you've got single child, only child, mum and dad. Mum, mental health issues. Dad, pretty top guy.
Yeah, my dad is amazing. We've always been very close, and he always says I'm just a dumb carpenter, but he's actually one of the smartest dumb carpenters I've ever met.
He's not a dumb carpenter. He's also a master builder, by the way. But, he's got an inquisitive mind just like you. And he's got a warm heart. He's got a good soul. The moment I met him, I was drawn to him. He's just an absolute sweetheart, isn't he?
He absolutely is, and we're very close for that reason. We just both love learning things and understanding people and situations.
So you've got one parent who is an absolute asset and the other one who was a tricky liability.
Very, very much. At least, I've read that in psychology, if you have that one stable adult through your childhood, it really helps with your resilience,
Yes.
overcoming trauma. So I'm so lucky I had my dad.
So you might be talking about resiliency in the literature. So if you have liabilities, if you have got some trauma, if you have got someone, it might be in the family, it might be a neighbour, it might be a teacher even, and this person is just a solid, grounded force, the resilient child says, right, you're a keeper, so dad's a keeper, and I'm going to just use you as an anchor point to cope with all of the turmoil of dysfunction around me.
Makes sense because, yes, dad definitely felt like my anchor all through my child and teen years.
And still is.
Yes, definitely.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we have two choices. You can decide. We can either go chronological in time and tell the story, or, interesting, we could, see, we don't actually do much prep, do we? This is very, very fresh, let's say. We can either go with the question of, at what point did it occur to you that mum was not actually healthy in herself? The moment that you went, hey, something's not right here, this is not a person who I can look to and presume that what comes out of her mouth is actually sound and rational and healthy, and then we can go back in time.
Well, that sounds like a good question to start with.
Yeah.
Let's go on the deep end. Well, I guess in answer to that, I always knew since she tried to kill me when I was a toddler. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. They go, okay, so you lived with her after what happened and you grew up with her. How did you feel about it? Did you block it out? But in actual fact, I remember everything that happened in strange, almost like photographic memories and just snapshots of trauma. And even from as young as maybe 4 or 5, I knew she took medication. I knew that she took medication so that he wouldn't hurt me again. And I knew that she was almost 2 people. So I don't know if you've seen like movies like Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
No.
I kind of thought of her like that as a child.
And what age did you see that movie?
I've never actually seen it, but I've read about it and seen it referenced a lot. I should actually watch it one day.
Don't do that.
shouldn't
It could disturb you.
I? But that's always the way I saw my mother growing up, because I knew that there was a good her who taught me how to cook and clean and sew, and he homeschooled me and taught me a lot of life skills.
Yeah.
And then there was the other her, which I saw when she stopped taking medication, and that I'd seen when I was younger when she attacked me. And so I was always aware of that. But I think there's a second level to your question, Kirsten, and that is around when I really realised it was an issue. And that was probably around age 14 when my parents split. And that was when I started going, hey, maybe it's not normal to act as if my mother is a normal everyday mother despite what she's done. And that's when I started to see some of her more narcissistic and controlling behaviours come out.
Absolutely. And so that's really interesting. We have a lot of people who have trauma in their background, and because they grow up in it, it is normal to them. You know, it's normal to have an alcoholic father. It's normal to have a mother with bipolar. It's normal to have, you know, abuse in the home, and they actually think that's quite normal. And then they go and there's some sort of social comparison. They realise, actually, this is an outlier. This is not actually typical and normal. So was there something like that? Was there, I mean, your parents separated, so that was information that Dad wasn't going to tolerate that?
I honestly don't remember there being a single thing that made me think differently. I think it was more the fact that as I went into teenagerhood, I got a new perspective. I started school because I'd been homeschooled as an only child up to that point. And
so you entered the world of peers at that point?
I guess so. And maybe I saw their mothers. Maybe that had some impact. Honestly, I don't remember a single point though.
But it is true. As teenagers, we go into each other's homes. I don't know if you did that. And we look around and we go, wow. I remember going into a home with a friend, and her father was very patriarchal and sexist. And I'd grown up in a female household. And I walked in and went, this makes no sense. You're telling me who I am and what I can do based on my gender. What? You know, you're what? And I remember being astounded by that and then learning about sexism from there. So that's a really kind of vanilla version, but but it's true. So I wonder if you got into the peer world and then realised, hey, there's a point of difference here.
Perhaps.
Let's go back for the listeners, because I think we've just bamboozled with information here. Let's go back. So can I just make the point, very interesting, that you knew your mum took medication, so you clearly saw that.
Yep, she didn't hide it or anything like that. I always saw her taking it every day.
Right, so very matter of fact. And you had mum who was connected to you, investing time with you, the home schooling with mum. Is that right?
Yep.
And very involved with these things. And then you had mum who was unwell, and so you attributed the medication to mum being well. Did you?
Yes, so I definitely linked the two. I was aware that the medication was to stop that other side of her coming out. And probably when I was 9 or 10 years old, that's when she started looking at alternative remedies instead and started cutting back on the medication.
Right. Okay. So let's go back. So can you just explain the context for her trying to kill you, what she did, what was happening around that time? And you say you've got very clear memory of that. Now, I'm wondering if that's post-traumatic stress, where we have intrusive images, so that's like a photo, or we have flashbacks, which is like a video, and our mind holds us in that time and holds that memory in a crisp, clear image, I guess, and that's very traumatic and very distressing, but it's also very adaptive because it says, hey, let's not go back to this dangerous situation again. It's a sort of warning. So I'm wondering if your crisp memories are actually those sorts of flashbacks or intrusive images.
Well, what happened from the start was I was 2.5 years old and I was an only child. I had an older sister, but she was ill in the hospital and wasn't at home. And my mother went through a psychotic episode. Until that point, she'd appeared to be mentally healthy and have no issues.
So no medication prior to that, no diagnosis?
No, nothing like that, not even things like depression or anxiety.
Right.
But it was the late 80s, so those kind of things weren't as commonly talked about or diagnosed either.
Sure.
So at 2.5, she bathed me one morning after my father had gone to work. She dressed me in a brand new set of pyjamas and she cut my throat with a knife. And then she held me for 40 minutes while I bled. And then she rang 000 and said, I think I've done something really bad. I've cut my daughter's neck. And fortunately they believed her, and police and ambulance officers came and saved my life.
Absolutely. And how critical was it after that? What was involved medically for you?
It was very touch and go. So it was in a small town called Dalby, which for those who are further afield is about an hour away from Toowoomba.
Which is like 2 hours from Brisbane. Which is basically a country town, relatively.
So it's quite small and the hospital isn't that big. So there was a general surgeon and an anaesthetist, and it was Australia Day weekend. So the surgeon was actually called in from home, and they took turns essentially holding and stitching parts of my throat while they gowned up and did everything to prepare for surgery, and then went in and inserted a tracheostomy tube into my throat, which is a tube that essentially goes down into your airway. It's a plastic tube, and I was to have that tube in my throat for a further 11 years. So in case my voice sounds a bit croaky and hoarse, that's why, because now I've still got a paralysed vocal cord.
Well, you do very well. And you talk a lot, and I love it.
I do talk a lot, yes.
And you joke that you can talk when you're breathing in and breathing out.
Well, come on. Someone's got to drown everyone else out occasionally.
I love it. So, a tracheotomy from the age of 2 through to 13, is that correct? 11 years?
Yeah, so 2.5 till I was 13.5, yeah.
And that's when you hit mainstream schooling. So was the tracheotomy the reason you did homeschooling?
Yes, so having a tracheostomy tube straight into your throat, it means that you inhale cold air, especially in winter,
Right.
and it bypasses your natural heating mechanisms of the mouth and the nose, which means that you're inhaling cold air straight into your lungs, which means I was at much higher risk of getting sick. And even while homeschooled, I'd often spend months where I was quite sick, and I'd have coughs and colds and so on.
So you really needed to be in that protected home environment.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And so then I'm guessing here that anatomically you needed to be older for them to finish up that surgery and for you to be good to go, because, you don't have any kind of, medical appendage now. You're good to go.
Well, honestly, no. When I was maybe 11 or 12, I remember my dad talking to me about how I deal with my tracheostomy as an adult or as a teenager.
Really?
So there was a lot of time, I think, where the doctors thought I'd have it for life.
Really?
Fortunately, they had some new advancements in laser surgery, and I was one of the first laser surgeries in Australia for the issues I had with my throat. I don't know the exact details, but they did a surgery, and then I still had to have my tracheostomy for a few more months, and then after that they took it out, and then later on they sewed up the hole, and then when I was 16, I think, I had plastic surgery on my neck to cover up the big scar that I had as well.
That's extraordinary. It really is. Did you grow up with the self-consciousness around this, or it was just business as usual?
When I had the tracheostomy, I was much more self-conscious because for some reason, when people look at you, they make assumptions based on what they see. And when someone sees you have a tracheostomy, they also think you're mentally disabled, it turns out.
They do not.
They do.
I do believe you. Obviously, I do believe you, but that's ridiculous. This is a physical issue.
Well, I often had people talk to me very slowly or even address adults around me. And
Susannah, you're one of the most intelligent people I know. That would have been infuriating.
It was
Not
a
that
little
anyone
bit.
deserves to be treated that way. Oh my gosh. Well, did you have any lines of, just shut up? Did you have any any ways of saying, hello, speak faster, you imbecile? Like what?
Well, honestly, I didn't, because I'm now a very loud, extroverted person who trolls bad people on the internet. Like, if you mess with someone and you're mean, I will take you down.
It's called a hobby.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, but back then, no, I was very, I guess, insulated by my homeschool environment. And as an only child, I didn't have any friends my own age. And there were other homeschoolers, but most of them played with me sometimes because they had to, or they're in different age ranges and that kind of thing. So I actually grew up with a very small social circle and didn't have much confidence.
Yeah, and on that point, we're going to do another podcast in the future about social anxiety and how you've really learnt to kind of get into the world and what those anxious triggers were. So,
I guess this is one of those things. Like, when I was young, I had all these issues that stayed with me, and now that I'm older, if I experience something like that, it makes me angry, and I go, how can I fix this and address it?
Yeah, I think you're a bit of an attack dog with that, aren't you? You know what I mean? You just rile up and you go, right, let's go.
If I'm scared of something, I will destroy it.
Yeah, there you go. That's what I'm talking about.
Especially if it's my own fears.
That's a great attitude. Okay, so going back, wow, I can only imagine, I can't actually imagine at all what your dad went through with discovering, his gorgeous 2-year-old baby and his wife, who clearly was going through a psychotic episode at that point. Did you get any more information about what your mother was thinking with, it sounds very sacrificial, doesn't it, to cut your child's throat, your infant's throat, 2-year-old. Do you have any more information about that?
So, as we talked about earlier in the chat, my dad is amazing and he was always very supportive. So he was very open about what had happened. He told me all the details he knew. I know the story of him turning up that day, all the things leading up to it and all the things that happened after. And at that time, my mum was reading about Abraham and Isaac in the Bible.
Right. So that's
And-
sacrificial sheep, yes?
Yes.
No, baby? Child?
It's both.
Both.
So for those who don't know, in the Bible what happened was Abraham was instructed by God to sacrifice his only child. And he took his child and was about to sacrifice him, and God said, okay, I've tested you. You've obviously stood up to the test. There's a sheep over there. Sacrifice the sheep instead. Unfortunately, in my case, God didn't make a sheep appear, so my mum, continued to sacrifice me instead.
Wow.
And I think there was also talk of she was going to put me in the oven, but she wanted me to die first.
There you go. Extremely unwell woman. And so did she go into hospital after that? I mean, you would have been in hospital for an extended period of time with your dad being the parent attending. Your mum, what happened to her?
So I was in hospital for 3 months.
Yes.
And Mum was taken to Bailey Henderson Hospital in Toowoomba.
So that's a psychiatric hospital?
Yep. And she was there for a year.
Right.
And then she started coming home on leave, and then she eventually returned home. But my father was on a carer's allowance and had to be with her at all times, so she had to be supervised with me.
How long did that go for that she had to be supervised?
I'm honestly not sure. I don't think it was that long from memory, because I did discuss this with my dad at one point, and I do have notes somewhere about it. But it wasn't that long. I think it was only maybe 2 or 3 years.
Right. And as a child, do you know if you had a fear response to your mum when you were reunited with her?
I'm not aware of anything, and no one else has mentioned it either. Honestly, I think, again, I recognise that there was the good her and the bad her.
Yeah, which
And I
is
think
true,
to
which is
disconnect
accurate.
them in my mind.
There was mum with her mental health on check and then mum with her mental health out of control. And that's a very astute observation for a child. And interestingly, a child is going to see the facts in front of them, and that's that, whereas an adult is going to have judgment. So I think it's really quite refreshing for a child to just see it through those innocent and pure eyes.
Well, I think it also helped the adults around me, normalised it as well. So all the relatives around me were just like, oh, she's still your mum. They treated her the same as they always did. And so I took from that it was okay for me to treat her the same as I'd always done.
And what was your mother's behaviour from there? Did she brush it under the mat? Did she walk around with the dark cloud of maternal guilt? What do you recall from her take on the situation, or did she just not comprehend?
Well, honestly, I don't think anyone's ever going to know. She did talk to my dad once while she was in Bailey Henderson, and she said, you don't know what it's like to cut human flesh.
Oh, I don't know what that means.
Well, she was essentially saying what she'd done to me when she cut my throat, and that Dad didn't understand that. But that's one of the few times she ever mentioned it to anyone that we're aware of.
That's almost wanting his sympathy.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
It's fascinating. In this current day and age, if something like this was to happen, we really bring a lot of cognitive behaviour therapy to psychosis. And there's a lot of information around putting language around what are your symptoms, what was happening, what was your level of insight, your level of preoccupation, your level of conviction, which was my honours thesis, by the way. So, there's a huge focus on education, verbalising, increasing insight and awareness, like responsibility. So for there to be such little dialogue around this blows my mind, and it scares me.
So dialogue around which part particularly?
I mean, you were the child, so maybe you weren't privy to it, but for you not to grow up with your mum verbalising her insight with regard to what happened.
Well, honestly, I think later, I'm not sure when, she did block it out, because years later, I was probably in my 20s, she actually did a Facebook post saying that someone else had snuck into the house and tried to attack her and had tried to kill me, and she saved my life.
Okay.
So she may have rewritten it at some stage in her head. I'm not sure when.
So perhaps she did that as a coping mechanism, or perhaps she was psychotic again and had a different delusion surrounding that, which, she'd be highly motivated. I don't know if you're aware of this, but with psychosis, I mean, if I have someone presenting with psychosis and I know they're deluded, I can pretty much pick what their delusional theme is going to be. If they have a religious quality to their history, then there's a religiosity, is that the word, to it. If there's a grandiosity, oh my gosh, if they're grandiose, then there's a quality of that to that. If they're a little bit paranoid, then there's going to be a paranoid quality. There's a real expression of the personality.
Is there ever a time where they just, have psychosis around ice cream and just make a lot of ice cream? That would be so nice.
No.
Oh, fine. Disappoint me then.
Yeah, no. Actually, there's really standard pathways. It's very interesting. So your mother had that religious quality, but my point is that later on for her to develop perhaps a delusion around justifying and moving herself away from accountability, she'd have a good, that would give her some level of peace of mind, perhaps, if she can change reality.
So perhaps in the long run it is better for her mental health not to remember it?
Well, there's a whole
That's
conversation.
That's a complex one, isn't it?
Well, it might help her to step away from the distress of accountability, but that's not exactly mental health, though, is it? When you're disappearing from reality.
True.
No.
But for me, that was one part of forgiving her when I was in my late 20s was I did an ABC radio documentary, and during that I really started to go through the details of what happened. I got my medical records, I talked to many people who'd been involved, and that was the point at which I started to empathise and go, imagine living with knowing you'd done this to your child, and also seeing proof of that every day because I had a tracheostomy. So it can't have been easy for her.
It's just tragedy all round, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you that. Did you get any observation or language from her with that confronting imagery? Okay, what's it called? I've got tracheotomy in my language. It's wrong.
So tracheostomy is the tube that's inserted. Tracheotomy is the procedure of cutting the throat to insert the tube.
Okay, so tracheostomy. So for her to live with you from, all the way through to 11, 12, plus, and she's got that visual cue, do you remember her reacting to that? Do you remember her finding that confronting visually?
No, I never remember her acknowledging what she'd done ever to me.
Really? And so tell me, and then the listeners obviously, with regard to how she tracked from there mental health wise, because obviously she's not great to not be able to, straight face up to history and her role in that, albeit it was when she was very florid in her mental state. But there was another flare up, wasn't there, when you were a bit older and bit of Melbourne action, I believe.
As I said earlier, she did start going off medication. I think I was 9 or 10. Mm-hmm. And as the years went on, she started to go through, not psychosis, but she was showing some mania and doing some things that weren't like her. We were in a very strict religious family, and so she always wore long skirts, was very modest. There were many things she wouldn't do. I, of course, wasn't allowed to watch Winnie the Pooh or Play School or anything like that. I didn't see The Lion King to my 20s.
Oh, did you cry?
No.
Oh my gosh, didn't you? So you weren't allowed to watch commercial type of media, basically.
Anything that was fiction.
What? You couldn't watch fiction?
Yes. She didn't agree with fiction. I couldn't read fiction. I read a lot of autobiographies.
Oh my gosh, fiction. That's our imagination. That is just my dreamland. To not be able to tap into that is just sad. Why? Was it a religious thing?
Yes.
Or was it to do with her belief system? Because
I think it was her personal belief system that was extended from the religion. It wasn't the religion as such. She took it and kind of made up her own rules.
Okay, so I don't know if I can put language around this. So would you say that you were brought up by a mother who then had her parenting very much influenced by her mental health perspective? So you had a bit of a left of centre approach to things. I mean, this whole issue of fiction is a case in point for that.
I think so, but I'd actually call it right of centre, since it's more right-wing beliefs, I think.
Touche. So very conservative.
Yes, very. We didn't even have a TV for quite a few years.
You are a big reader, aren't you?
I do love my books.
Yeah.
But the unusual thing that happened was she went off medication and all those things started changing. She wore shorter skirts. She started wearing makeup, which she'd never worn before. And when I was, I must have been about 12, he took me away to Perth. And she didn't give much notice to anyone other than a couple of close friends, and we went to visit them. And
So can I just clarify? Did she take off with you and not tell your dad?
yes,
Right, so she abducted you.
essentially yes. So he was at work.
Sorry, essentially, or she did? Like, how is that not abduction?
Well, I think legally it's not abduction if it's a parent, right?
Yeah, but when you've got one with significant, I mean, she's not going to know this, is she? But when you've got one with significant mental health problems, and you've got the other one as being the one that is the foundation, that sound mind, and you know, the child is abducted from the sound mind parent, I would put that in the abduction category. But you're right, I'm talking psychologically, you're talking legally. Okay.
Well, she convinced friends that my dad was abusing her.
Right.
And my uncle from Adelaide was at the friend's house and said, "Okay, get in the car. We're going to Adelaide, and then you're flying to Perth," which was a huge trip. And so I spent a couple of days at least in the car with them, talking and bagging my dad, and
So we're crossing
all sorts of things.
we're crossing the continent of Australia here.
Yeah, so all the way down to Adelaide. Where I stayed with some more relatives, and then we ended up in Perth with my maternal grandparents. And they, because they were in Perth, we didn't see them that often, and they weren't aware of the ongoing issues.
So they didn't know about your mum's mental health, how she was really changing in her framework. Okay, so were you scared at all? Were you aware that something was not right? Your dad was not part of this plan? Did you know?
Don't think I was scared initially. I just knew to some extent that, hey, mum and dad sometimes fought about things, and maybe things are going on I didn't know about, and mum and dad, well, I didn't think about mum as the main reason, but the family friends, I trusted them.
Sure.
And they were close. They were actually people we saw often weekly or monthly. And so I went, if they say there's a problem and they're supporting mum, they must know what's going on. And obviously it's too old for me to understand.
Sure.
But once we got to Perth, that's when I started going, wait a sec, this isn't right.
Okay. So fast forward a bit. How did this play out?
So we were in Perth, I'm not even sure, it was over a month.
Right.
It was probably 5 or 6 weeks in the end. And mum seemed mostly normal at first, but the longer we stayed there, the stranger it got. She started meeting strangers on the street and talking to anyone who'd even look at her sideways, and she'd have this whole conversation. She could make someone cry in 10 minutes of meeting them. She had a really good knack of figuring out your soft spots and your fears and just hammering at them. And she also ended up having an affair with a biker.
Right.
And she hadn't left Dad. She hadn't said she left him. She said she was taking a break till he sorted things out.
So we've really got her inhibitions down. We've got all sorts of kind of reaching out, sort of, you know, behaviour with strangers, risk-taking behaviour perhaps. Yeah, not behaving like the previous person who was all very conservative. Big change.
Definitely.
Big change. So how did your dad get notified?
Well, my grandparents up to that point were like, okay, Dad must be abusing her. She's our daughter, of course we'll support her. But they started seeing that she was having all these strange behaviours as well, and they started to question it. And one day it just culminated in her becoming very psychotic. She tied up both phones in the house and was yelling at anyone trying to talk to her, including the family friend from Queensland. She was yelling at everyone. My grandpa had heart problems already, so he was getting very stressed by it, and he'd been doing all these strange things, and so they rang my father and said, "We don't know what's going on with her. Something's going on. You need to come get her and probably put her in hospital."
Help.
And he flew out probably the next day, and he arrived, and she ran away because she heard on the answering machine that he'd arrived at the airport.
Right.
And he was wearing just like very skimpy clothing, disappeared into the night in Perth. We had police looking for her, and yeah, it was a bit of a mess. And police eventually picked her up, and she was in a taxi, and she's truly amazing when psychotic. She's very, very intelligent despite her mental health issues. And she was quoting laws at the police officers. She was arguing with them, telling them all the legal things they had, rules about taxis, taking her to her destinations, all these different things. And they just had to go, no, we're not listening to any of this. You need to get in the paddy wagon if you're not going to listen to us.
So perhaps you get your intelligence from both parents.
Perhaps.
Perhaps.
I hope I just got the good parts of both parents. So.
Yeah, definitely. So let's fast forward again. What happened from there with Mum in your world from then and Dad and Mum separating?
Well, my dad had been there a few days and Mum was in a psych ward in Perth. And I said to him, Dad, you need to divorce Mum.
Really? So it took you as the teenage child to say, Dad, shake, 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 divorce my mother, please.
Yes. I'm hoping, we've never actually talked about, but I'm hoping he was already thinking about that.
You'd think it would have crossed his mind.
Yeah, hopefully. And the amount of money he'd spent over those 3 months just back and forth across the country and missed hours and organising things just to bring her home. And I think it was about 4 months later, it was during the first set of school holidays I had because I started school that year.
Right.
And that was when they went, we're separating. And I was just like, oh, thank goodness.
So was that about you wanting to get away from your mum's instability, or was it just you empathised with your dad? It wasn't good for him.
Well, up to that point, I'd always gone, okay, she's maybe a little more conservative than most mums, but she's a normal mum. But having seen her in Perth, I went, okay, there's all the things that, as a child, there's things you don't like about your parents. Whether it's them telling you what to do or them telling you how to do or act or do certain things, which is normal.
Yes.
And I'd always just gone, oh, okay, so there's lots of things that annoy me about Mum, but that's normal. I'm a kid. Parents do things you don't like. But after Perth, I realised that a lot of the things that she did that annoyed me weren't normal at all. And it really wasn't me, it was her.
And there's that wake up to what is relative to others. Yeah,
Yep.
Absolutely. So again, I mean, I'm saying fast forward because we could be here for hours because there's so much to this story. Let's fast forward to you as an adult. What's your contact with your mum?
So the last time I've seen her in person is 2008.
And you were how old-ish?
22.
22.
Just before I had my first child.
Sure, sure. And how did she disappear from your world?
It was me. I just didn't contact her again. She tried to contact me, and this is something I found before. When I door slam someone, I find that if I tell them, I can't do it because I always go back. But at this point, I just felt like I'd been fed up during the years in between as a teenager, into my early of my marriage. She just caused so many issues, and there was always something where she just...
So was it tumultuous? Was it throughout your teen
it was
ages?
messy.
Teen years, into your early 20s. Was it tumultuous throughout that time as well?
Yeah, and one day I just went, can't do this anymore, and I just stopped talking to her.
And you know what? This often happens when we have children. Mama Bear comes out and goes, okay, new chapter. I need to protect. I need it to be healthy. It's a new launch. Do you think that was a factor for you?
Well, I think I last saw her probably maybe 6 to 8 months before I got pregnant.
Okay.
But I think it's probably what continued me not talking to her,
That
definitely.
resolve. Yeah, sure. Fair enough. Absolutely.
Because my children haven't met her, and I'd like to keep it that way.
Yeah.
At least until they're old enough to understand.
Yeah, you're protecting them from any kind of negative impact if she's unwell.
Definitely.
Now, has that been difficult for you? What's that like for you as an adult now? How old are you now?
I'm 35 now, so I haven't been talking to her for 13 years.
Yeah, sure. So what's it like for you over this time, last few years? Is it in your mind? Is it peace of mind? Has it been difficult for you?
I went through a stage where I was like, I really miss having a mum, especially when having your own babies, and all my friends had their mothers around at their birth, helping them, all that kind of thing. Yeah. So I actually started like a Facebook group and a Facebook page and wrote things about it on the internet. So I've got a community now who talks about it that I built.
What's that called?
Women Without Mothers Club.
There you go, right.
But I went through that phase, and then I kind of moved on after I had kids and went, I'm okay without having a mother around. But there are still some days, like Mother's Day, where you go, oh, it'd be really nice to have a mum around. Or when I think about things like, coming up with an outfit or putting on makeup or cooking, and you go, wouldn't it be nice if I had a mum I could call and go, hey, how much of this ingredient should I put in this? Like, how do I do mascara properly or whatever it is?
Yeah. Have you found yourself being drawn to strong women that are like role models for you? We talked about resilience earlier, where we outsource and we bring people to you that are, fuel that maternal role for you?
Well, yes and no. That's a complicated question, because I find I'm drawn to them, but at the same time I kind of fight against them. So there have been cases where I've been drawn to strong older female figures, but at the same time I
don't trust.
A lot of them feel like they want to be my mother, and I guess I fight against that because I'm like, I don't need a mother, I'm independent. And as soon as there's that attachment going on, or where they feel they have to boss me around or fill that role, I go, no, wait a minute, no.
When I think of a female mentor, they don't necessarily know that they are. They're people that you look to and you aspire towards and you feel strength in. They give you hope and direction. But you don't necessarily actually go into that child-mother role at all. Does that make sense?
Well, I do have a stepmother, but she's fantastic because she's never pushy. Yeah. She doesn't go out of her way to, tell me what to do. But if I need her to babysit or do something like that, she's there when I need her, which is the perfect combination.
Absolutely. So, do you know much about what's happened to your mum in this period of time? And this is a bit of a wild card. I hope you don't mind. But when we have someone in our family with a mental health problem, often when we become an adult, we become the caregiver mode. I'm not remotely suggesting you should be your mother's caregiver, but because I'm not implying that would be healthy or safe for you. But I guess I'm wondering if you're aware of her movements, and have you ever wondered whether there's that change of roles, I guess. I mean, she's still, a youngish, like she's not an old elderly lady by any stretch.
Early 60s.
Yeah, but, she's not in her 70s or 80s.
No.
So she's not looking for a carer at this age unless... Yeah, so what's your understanding of what her journey has been? I know you've tapped in and, you're incredible online with your research capacity. You tried to look me up once before I joined social media and you couldn't find anything. I was so proud.
Oh, I did find a few things, but I better not say that on air.
Pretty lame. But anyway, so what have you found with your mum? Because I know you keep an eye out on her.
I actually, at one point, I used to, go stalk her profiles and all that. And these days, I just don't really think about it as much. I do have family members who update me occasionally.
Right, so she's still connected. She's connected with her siblings and her mum. So, she has that family kind of awareness and, she's got that support network in some form as well.
Mm. So she's in a different state. I know she's living near her relatives.
Yeah.
And she's also remarried. She remarried the same year that I got married.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, so back in 2007.
She's changed her name a few times?
Yeah, she legally changed her name as well, and then she also took a further name when she married.
Sure.
But yeah, she's living somewhere far afield, and from my understanding, she seems to end up in hospital probably every 2 to 3 years. So it seems to be something that cycles for her.
So if you don't mind me mentioning this, I'm sure you won't. There's been a screenplay written about your journey, and it's won an award.
Yeah.
What's the name of the screenplay? Do you know?
Oh. We're kind of working off different names. It's had a few different ones that we've gone through. At the moment, I think it's A Living Sacrifice.
A Living Sacrifice. And what award has that won?
Oh, now you're testing me. I think it's Australian International Screenwriting Awards.
Sounds very impressive. And you're in the process of writing your memoir?
Slowly but surely.
Yeah, I'm poking you every time we see each other, aren't I?
Don't worry, lots of people are.
Yeah. I guess I'm wondering when this sort of media and, coverage comes up, are you worried about your mum knocking on your door? Are you worried about any kind of future trajectory of mum knocking on your door? How do you feel? Do you feel unsafe?
I guess these days I don't really think about it as much. I mean, I have ongoing issues like I hate being alone at night in the dark.
Yes.
But I think that's more to do with overall trauma in my life, not particularly my mother in herself. So at this point, I don't really think about that happening. I know she's quite a way away, so if she was to come to Toowoomba, I also feel safe in knowing that I know people who's let me know as well.
Yeah, sure.
And I also was alone with her during psychosis several times as a teenager. And I survived that. So I feel like if I could do it as a teenager, I'm much more stronger and independent now.
That's it. As we get older, we get strong and uglier, don't we? We can work these things out, but you do have children to protect as well.
This is true. So obviously I have things in place around, when they can be in photos, who can pick them up from school. I talk to the appropriate people and they all know the background. Bear. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So here's a very ambitious question. Well, first of all, can I just clarify, to your knowledge, has your mother's obviously not my client, I've never met her, does she have a formal diagnosis?
That's
schizophrenia is the
question.
obvious question.
Well, originally it was schizophrenia.
Yes.
After Perth, they re-diagnosed it as bipolar. Yeah.
That doesn't make sense at all.
Type 1, they said.
No.
But
because bipolar people don't have delusions, they don't carry out that level. They might have particularly florid behaviour with regard to that manic episode, but not a whole belief system. But anyway, sorry. I'll be quiet and listen.
Honestly, I don't know. I do know that she said to my father that she basically tells psychiatrists what they want to hear, and she's very good at lying to them. So honestly, I don't know if it's possible to diagnose her that easily because she's very, very, as I said, quite intelligent.
Yeah, she's very adaptive.
And she's very good at making people believe what she wants them to believe. So I think it would be very difficult to actually diagnose her without some very in-depth analysis.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's my big question to wrap up on, if that's okay. And you jump in if you want to add anything, because
Sure.
I have been steering the ship, haven't I? This whole life experience that you've had, I mean, you don't know any other way or any other world, but what if you hadn't have had this trauma, if you hadn't have had this early physical trauma, psychological trauma as a 2-year-old, and then this journey with parenting with your mum, with her framework, and being isolated relatively as homeschooling, I guess, and with trachea, I'm going to abbreviate, it would be a different pathway. I guess I'm wondering, with what you have been through, what are you glad of? What are you glad of that you have been able to, grow into who you are with the strengths that you have, which you well and truly have?
Well, I guess I'm glad that, and this comes down to something that I call mental health privilege.
I like that.
I find that I can be really glad that if I go to the doctor and I say I'm having mental health issues or I'm having medical issues or anything like that, they immediately listen to me. So people who have mental health issues and they don't have any outside physical scars, it's really hard for them to get help. Whereas me, I just go, this is what my mum did, and suddenly they will give me any medication, any referrals, any help that I want. They'll go, oh, how are you not more traumatised? So I think I'm glad that what happened to me was bad enough that I can get help.
Isn't that sad, the idea? I mean, I hear you, but isn't it sad to think that it's a positive to have a voice and to have people take you seriously? I mean, everyone should be taken seriously when they speak up and they're courageous enough to have that voice.
Well, this is the sad thing about mental health. Because people can't see it the way they can something that's a physical illness.
Oh my gosh, good point. So many people say to me, I wish I had a broken arm, because then people would understand the pain. I mean, you're like, I have a broken arm.
Yeah, essentially. I just go, I've got this slice on my neck and this is what my mum did. And they go, oh, anything we can do to help.
Well, I must say, I did not expect that answer.
I like to surprise.
You do. Anything you want to throw in? Because we've done so well.
Oh, well, it's been a great interview. Thank you, Kirsten. I guess the main thing to keep in mind is that when it comes down to it, you can just keep putting one foot in front of the other. So many people go, how do you just keep going? And I go, well, honestly, coffee. And you just get up and do things and keep on with your life. Sometimes I actually forget everything that's happened, and it might be a full day or two, and then suddenly I have a realization like, holy moly, my mother cut my neck, and I kind of forgot it happened. And I'm like, oh wow, that's a big deal. I'm just so used to it, I forget it's a thing.
It's amazing what becomes normal.
Exactly. As you said, normal. We all have our own normal, and people look at mine and go, I couldn't live through that. But honestly, you can. Once you get over the initial hill, and if you give yourself the time, then you can get through things. You just put one foot in front of the other and find things you enjoy doing and do them.
Well, can I say that I absolutely love your insatiable appetite for life?
Thank
And
you.
That's correct, isn't it?
I love study, I love learning, I love people, I love everything.
Yeah, you're just a go. You're an enthusiast. You're a life enthusiast, and you're inspiring with your enthusiasm. It's wonderful. And I love when we get together, we kind of pile on top of each other with
Ideas.
our latest project, which is just so delightful. Thank you so much for sharing this. I think it's so good for people to hear other people's experiences and how they've come through that. I think it's really important. The big picture out of all this that I see is compassion for all. You know, I truly have compassion for your mum. I truly have compassion for your dad, and I really have compassion for you. You know, it's such a story of family just getting through and coming out the other end, and you're thriving, truly thriving, and it's wonderful. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Now, you're better at this than me. Do you want to read it for me? Here you go. Handing it over.
Oh, I guess I can do that for you, Kirsten.
Thank you, darling.
So, thank you everyone who tuned into the interview today. Thank you for listening. And if you want to find out more about Kirsten Hunter, you can visit her website at kirstenhunterauthor.com, Facebook, Kirsten Hunter Author, Instagram, Kirsten Hunter Author, and Twitter is Kirsten Hunter AU. Now, you can also look her up on YouTube. Her channel is Psych in Your Car, which is a fantastic idea. And, of course, this podcast is Signpost for Living with Dr. Kirsten Hunter. Now, if you've enjoyed this interview with me, feel free to reach out and, of course, subscribe to listen to more amazing, intriguing interviews and topics with Kirsten in future.
Thank you, darling. I'll bring you in every week for that, hey?
Oh, yes, sure.
See you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.